guys, Jim here again. Here to bring you guys in the MMA fight prediction video, and this time I'm covering the UFC 158's co-main event that features a rematch between Rory, the Aries MacDonald, versus Carlos, the natural-born killer Condit. I will give you guys a backstory into what led to this fight. I will cover their first fight along with what they've been up to as of late since that fight, and where the winner of this fight goes in the welterweight packing order after the dust settles. I will also give you guys a full detailed fight breakdown of the two fighters, how I see the fight going, and who I have coming out victorious. Now, without further ado, let's get this thing on. Now, this rematch between Rory MacDonald and Carlos Condit is going to answer a lot of questions about both guys' futures in the division. Who goes up, who goes down, but we do know that whoever wins is in the mix for a title shot. But Rory's probably definitely a lot closer than Carlos, especially after Carlos' recent defeat to Georges St-Pierre. But in their first fight, Rory dominated the stand-up, and he dominated the grappling in the first two rounds. But the second round, they both went in for an up kick at the very end, and it was sweet, but it was a little bit funny seeing Carlos fall on his ass. I ain't gonna lie, that was pretty funny. But the third round, Greg Jackson told Carlos, it's time to go to war. And that's the first time Greg Jackson was not calm, cool, and collected. He was like, basically like, it's time to go to war, Carlos. He was very adamant about that. You gotta win this fight in that third round. So, theoretically, Carlos defeated Rory with 7 seconds left on the clock because Rory, A, ran out of gas, and Carlos was basically dominating him that whole round, and TKO'd him with 7 seconds left on the clock to claim the miracle victory at UFC 115 in Vancouver. But since then, both fighters have improved leaps and bounds. Carlos won 3 more fights since that fight by knocking out Dan Hardy in the first round, knocking out Don Young Kim with knees and punches, and outpointing Nick Diaz in a controversial fight to win the UFC interim championship at UFC 143. Then he went on to face Georges St-Pierre, losing to St-Pierre, snapping a 5-fight win streak. But Carlos came the closest that anybody has ever come to knocking out Georges St-Pierre and defeating him in a long time, because he's only one of 2 men to ever knock down Georges St-Pierre in an MMA fight. So that's something to be proud of. And Georges St-Pierre said after that fight that he's the toughest fighter I've ever fought, and that entire fight Carlos was like, you know, he was very game. But one thing he needs to work on is his wrestling, most definitely. That's his main weakness right there, is the wrestling. Rory, meanwhile, has steamrolled through 4 straight opponents, basically slamming Nick Diaz's head off into the next millennium to claim a unanimous decision victory, where he had more diverse striking than Nate and basically suplexed him to hell in the third round and sent him back to lightweight where he belongs. And then he finished Mike Pyle in the first round and sent him to the back of the line. And then after that, at UFC 145 most recently this year, he destroyed Shane Mills, an up-and-comer from England, by TKO. He was cutting him up and roughing him up. I mean, that was great. And then this past summer, he called out BJ Penn, you know, talk some shit, I mean, that was the first time we seen Rory actually like start talking some trash and backing it up, you know. And then when he got to the fight at UFC on Fox 5 against BJ, he outclassed him and showed him firsthand the new breed of mixed martial arts, and shut him down with the striking and the wrestling to earn a unanimous decision victory over the Prodigy. Although I think he could have finished him in that second round, because he had BJ hurt, had a bleeding in the mouth. I mean, literally, he could have finished him. I'm just saying, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I think he could have finished him. It is what it is, though. Now, after that fight, he called out Carlos Condit. He said that's the fight that he's been giving up at night. He was humiliated by that fight, and he'd like a rematch against Carlos. Carlos accepted, and it was booked for UFC 158 in Montreal. And now these guys are going to collide next year. Now, like I said before, it's going to answer a lot of questions on where these guys go from here. Can Rory avenge his loss, and can Carlos put Rory in his place? You know, that's the question mark there. And the winner moves closer to a welterweight title shot after the winner of Hendricks and Ellenberger get their shot against the winner of Diaz and GSP. But then again, it depends on what happens, though, because under certain circumstances, if either GSP or Diaz, depending on who wins, takes a fight with Anderson Silva, then Hendricks, Rory, and Carlos, and everybody else who is going to be at the back of the line. And they're going to have to fight some more fights to get a title shot. But I truly believe that Carlos is going to need a couple more victories if Georges St-Pierre beats both Hendricks and Diaz. He's going to need maybe 2 to 3 victories before he gets another title shot. Rory and GSP, it needs to happen, but knowing those little tricky characters are going to try to move up and wait to prevent the fight, but they both stay at 170, that fight will happen, people. That fight will happen, and I already have who I think is going to win that fight in my official fight breakdown and prediction after, you know, we're set and done with this right here. But we'll get to that coming up next. But to close this off, it's basically, in this fight, either, you know, win or go home, because one person is going to put the other one back to the bottom of the barrel, and if Carlos beats Rory, then he's really in the back of the line, because I don't think they're going to do a trilogy. They're going to do a trilogy if Carlos beats him back to back. But if Rory beats him, and if Rory wins the welterweight title and Carlos puts some wins together, that could create a very big pay-per-view revenue fight for the UFC. That'd be a huge trilogy fight. I mean, you can very well sell that, because the first fight was exciting. I mean, this fight will be exciting too. But nevertheless, we got to see what happens. Now, moving on to the official fight breakdown and prediction coming up right about now. Coming into this fight, it's very clear that Rory MacDonald is the new breed and the new Georges St-Pierre, and the future of the welterweight division, and the future of the UFC too, along with John Jones, because this kid is great everywhere beyond his years. He's got an excellent diverse skill set, similar to his mentor Georges St-Pierre. He's got good wrestling, great striking, and good submissions too. Now, Carlos, on the other hand, has the better diverse striking, because, I mean, he's more experienced than Rory, and he's got knockout power too. So, for that perspective, we have to give that to Carlos, and he's also a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. And he also has 13 submission victories and 13 knockout victories. I mean, in his record of 26-8. Now, Rory, on the other hand, does have finishability, more so than Georges St-Pierre at 14-1, with all of his career major signature victories coming with 6 knockouts and 6 submissions to his 14-1 overall record. Now, he did show that finishability against Che Mills when he chopped his face to chop meat, and Mike Pyle when he TKO'd him, and when he submitted Mike Guyman and a bunch of other people in Canada at the bottom of the barrel that we don't even know about. Now, quite frankly, his best asset is that he's younger and that he continues to progress. Specifically in that BJ Penn fight where he outclassed BJ on the feet, and BJ is one of the best strikers of all time in the UFC, you know, and he is. He's one of the best strikers and one of the best submission guys in the UFC, and a legend, no less. And Rory basically dismantled it. Now, quite frankly, in their first fight, like I stated earlier, Rory dominated both the striking and the grappling, and he wasn't really intimidated by anything that Carlos Condit brought. The only thing that failed him in the end was he ran out of gas. In that third round, Carlos took advantage and finished him within 7 seconds of that fight at UFC 115, when clearly he was losing it. But Carlos, meanwhile, definitely has improved his striking and all that by working with Mike Winklejohn. But the one thing where Carlos still has not improved enough to really benefit him in this fight, which is very evident in the Georges St-Pierre fight, is his wrestling. He has not improved his wrestling enough. So, I mean, the main thing for him to improve on is his wrestling. Because if he doesn't improve on that, he's going to have a tough time getting past some of the best wrestlers in the division. And if he gets another shot at GSP, if GSP is victorious against Nick Diaz, after he's probably had like 3 or 4 fights, if he doesn't improve his wrestling, it's going to be a repeat of what happened last time. Takedown, elbows, and him losing a decision. That's simple. Minus the miracle head kick in the 3rd round. That ain't going to happen. Yours be ready for that one. But, yeah. But one thing Carlos does well is adapt to each and every fighter and find a way to win. That's his strength. One of his main strengths, and his heart. Now, the key for him to beat Rory MacDonald is not to stay on the ground for very long like he did in the GSP fight. Get the better of the exchanges and keep the fight standing above all. Do not stay on the ground for very long. But if he gets on the ground, if he's not actually effectively getting the submissions on top, or at least threatening it or coming close to submissions, he is not going to win this fight. Now, Rory, to his credit, all he has to do, because it was similar to what he did last time, because he already had Carlos's game memorized, him and Faraz both, and I'm pretty sure after the George fight, they've got a better idea of how to deal with Carlos, his style, because they've already, as Faraz and George have already, you know, opened up the blueprint to that already. They're going to watch that tape and use some of the similar strategy. It was basically control Carlos on the ground, get, you know, set this, use the strikes to set up the takedowns, and elbow his face in. But I think, unlike George, Roy will be able to finish him on the ground. I do. I really do. I think he'll be able to finish him on the ground this time. Because, I mean, Rory wants this bad, and I think he's going to be able to finish Carlos on the ground by cuts. most definitely, because Carlos has been rocked, but he's never been knocked out. But there's a time for everything. There's a time to heal. There's a time to sleep. There's a time to laugh, and there's a time to get your ass the hell knocked the hell out. You know, and I think Rory will be able to get him on the ground and knock him out. I really do. If he can basically, you know, defend the submission attempts and getting clean like he did against Chain Mills, he might have a shot at doing that. But it depends, though. Carlos is not going to come along quietly. He is going to be very game. Because the one thing about Carlos is that he does not quit. You have to either submit him, which a lot of those losses have come by submission, because he's never been knocked out, but I think Rory will be the one to do it. I think Rory, this time around, will be the one to do it. But like I said before, for Rory, it's basically use the strikes to set up the takedowns, elbow his face, make him bleed, either probably stop him by TKO and cuts or TKO him. I think he'll be able to get the knockout victory, well, technical knockout victory anyways, and finish Carlos this time. Carlos could very well just do the same thing he did in the Don Young Kim fight, which is adapt, get back up to his feet, and get a flying knee to Rory's chin and knock him the hell out. But my official prediction for this fight is that Rory MacDonald either defeats Carlos Condit this time by unanimous decision, by, you know, using all of his energy, you know, effectively and dispersing it evenly throughout the fight, you know, not getting himself exhausted like he did in the first fight. Or, you know, I got him winning by TKO and cuts. I think he's going to be able to cut him real good and finish him, or get the technical knockout victory, you know, and get the ref to stop it. But if Rory were able to KO him, which I think he's going to be able to do, that would be sweet. And then from there, I think he's going to continue to keep on dismantling whoever's next. And if George wins, he's going to eventually have to fight him. They can say they're not going to fight each other. Rashad and Jones said they were not going to fight each other. And look what happened. They went in, they fought each other, and it is what it is. It's history. And I really think George would actually lose to Rory too. I think Rory's the guy to beat George St. Pierre. But hey, that's a big if. But then again, you know what you never know what could happen. Nick Diaz could very well beat George St. Pierre, or Johnny Hendricks could very well beat George St. Pierre. I mean, miracles do happen. I don't really see Johnny beating George St. Pierre under those circumstances. But it really depends on who comes out victorious each one of those fights, because Nick Diaz could very well beat George St. Pierre, and then Johnny Hendricks could, like, you know, beat Jake Ellenberger and then beat Nick Diaz, and he'd have to face Johnny Hendricks eventually, or vice versa. It really doesn't matter. I see Rory getting a title shot, you know, but either way, it's gonna be, you know, it's gotta happen. It's gotta happen. It's gotta happen. I mean, literally, I think Rory beats George St. Pierre if the fight happens, and I think Dana can make him do it unless Rory or GSP move up to 185 pounds to avoid the fight. But if they both stay at welterweight, and Rory keeps on winning, and GSP keeps on winning, and if he doesn't lose to Nick Diaz or Johnny Hendricks or anybody else, or Ellenberger, if Ellenberger beats Hendricks, this fight between Rory MacDonald and George St. Pierre will happen. It will happen if they both stay welterweight. Now, that ends today's fight prediction video. I'm Jim signing off. Keep on watching the fights, people. See you next time.